Hello everybody, this is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about the Anglican Church and why it does not have apostolic succession. Now before we begin, let's start with a prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, sicut erat in principio et nunc et semper et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. All right, so apostolic succession. Who really has it? The Catholic Church does, and the Orthodox do. And what is apostolic succession? It's essentially Christ gave the apostles, who were the proto-bishops, the ability to perform sacraments, for example. So you see this at the end of John 20 when he breathes on them and says you can forgive sins. You see this in Matthew 16, Matthew 18, whatever you bind is bound. And you see at the Last Supper where he essentially establishes the priesthood. And so in the Catholic Church, we have unbroken apostolic succession. It has never changed. Like every priest theoretically can trace its lineage back to the early apostles. Now in terms of paperwork, we only have it till about the 14th century. But in terms of overall church history, we have an unbroken line that goes all the way back to Christ. Now, the Orthodox also have it, so their sacraments are valid. So if you go to an Orthodox church, they can have the real presence, they can do confirmations, they can do anything, last rites and so forth that you could have in a Catholic church. Now let's talk about Anglicanism. So Anglicanism, Catholicism was very strong in England. It got there around 400 AD at the end of the Roman Empire, and it was very strong for 1,000 years. And in fact, Henry VIII, as we know, is the one who broke away from the church. He was considered or called the defender of the faith by the Pope a few years before he broke away. But we know the story about Anne Boleyn and so forth. So in 1534, he established through Parliament an act of supremacy. So he became the head of the church. So, and he also confiscated monastery land. And there was an uprising of this because the people didn't really like what was going on. But that only made him a schismatic, no different than the Orthodox different groups. Because again, there isn't one unified Orthodox group. There's different: Russian, Greek, Bulgarian, Serbian. And so he became a schismatic, but the church there still had valid orders. What changed was at the end of Henry VIII's term, and certainly his son, his much sought after son that he finally got from Jane Seymour, there was an infiltration of Protestantism. So of course, during this time, you have concomitant to this time, or contemporaneous to this time would be Luther and Calvin and Zwingli. This is 1530s, 1540s, 1550s, and so forth. And so you saw a lot of this come into the English Reformation. And so in the English Reformation, you saw a lot of rejection of Catholic beliefs. So of course, papal infallibility, the primacy of Rome, obviously, since Henry VIII did that. The belief that the Eucharist was no longer the real presence. You look at the intercession of saints, the belief in purgatory. Also, you look at a lot of the architects of the English Reformation, most famous Archbishop Cranmer, who was later executed by Bloody Mary, by Queen Mary. They all went to Europe to consult with Zwingli, Calvin, Luther, and others, and they wanted to bring this back. So it wasn't just like, let's break away from Rome, but still maintain a kind of a schismatic but Catholic in nature church. No, they incorporate a lot of this, the Protestant beliefs, into the ordinal, into the books of common prayer that came out. And the main reason why they don't have apostolic succession is because in 1552, Edward VI, who was the son of Henry VIII, he composed or he authorized a missal which fundamentally changed the nature of the priesthood. And as a result of that, no longer did they believe that the priest had the ability to, since they no longer believed in the real presence, had the ability to did no longer had the same belief of the Catholic view of the priesthood. So we'll just keep it very simple. And since they changed the words of the holy orders, of the sacrament of holy orders, even though they essentially stripped down the sacraments, since they changed fundamentally the words of holy orders, they lost apostolic succession at that point. And so all the bishops and priests prior to that, think of Bishop John Fisher, most famously martyred by Henry VIII because he wouldn't take the oath to say that he was the head of the church, were all valid. And had they not changed the words of ordination, so to speak, and not fundamentally changed their beliefs, they would be like the Oriental churches, like the Orthodox churches, still having a valid apostolic succession, but just be broken away. But they changed the words. And so this was all verified and pronounced essentially ex cathedra by Leo XIII in 1896. And he said that the Anglican orders, and so Episcopalian, Anglican, everything, that's the branch of the Anglican Church, Church of England, were considered null and void. So it is a settled topic that can not be undone. If it's undone by Francis or somebody else, then we got some issues. But the Anglicans don't have valid apostolic succession. So for example, if you got confirmed in the Anglican Church or the Church of England or Episcopalian, the Catholic Church does not recognize that because the priests of the Anglican Church don't have the ability, because they no longer have apostolic succession, to confer the rite of confirmation. Now, the baptism, of course, is still valid because I could do a baptism of worst case scenario. So baptism in marriage is always recognized as long as the baptism is Trinitarian. But in terms of the Eucharist, in terms of confession, in terms of confirmation, they don't have valid rights. And so in closing, you saw kind of a move. Cardinal Newman's most famous of this in the 19th century. And then certainly later, you saw kind of the high Anglican Church kind of have this movement to go back to Catholicism. And as recently as John Paul II granted I want to say it's called a dispensation, but granted the ability for certain Anglican priests to come back to Holy Mother Church. Of course, they had to swear allegiance to the Pope and so forth and agree to all the beliefs, the dogmatic beliefs of the Catholic Church. And that's why you see the ordinariate of the Chair of St. Peter. If you live here in America and in Canada, there's, I don't know, maybe 30, 40 of these national dioceses of these churches, which are essentially, for lack of a better word, Anglican rite. Their liturgies are different than the typical suburban parish you would go to that's Catholic, but they are Catholic 100%, and they are, some of them are married. If they got married before ordination, then you can have a married priest. But if they were married, if they were ordained and then they got married, then they can't get married after the fact. But so you see this movement of the high church of Anglicanism sometimes going back to Holy Mother Church. But essentially the main reason they don't have apostolic succession is because they changed the words and they changed the definition of what it means to be a priest. And they changed the altars and put in the wooden tables, and they no longer believed that it was a holy sacrifice of the Mass. It was more of a table of plenty, a banquet, a communion, and so forth. So in short, that's what it is. Guys, post in the comments. Let me know what you think of Anglicanism. As you know, some of you know, like on the moral teachings, they have openly active homosexual priests and even bishops in the church. And if some of you in the Anglican Church and the Episcopalian, and some of you might not know this, but there is a schismatic movement in the Church of England because the more traditional, moral-minded bishops, mostly in Africa, are like, you can't have an open homosexual bishop, or it's not like he's like, they're just like, I identify as homosexual, but I am not actually sodomizing. No, they're just in active relationships with people. And so you see this schism, and then anytime you leave the Bishop of Rome, you see the breakoff of the breakoff and the breakoff. There's not one holy Catholic and apostolic. But either way, all right, guys, post in the comments. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear from you. Please hit the notification, subscribe, and share button. Share with other people. Until next time, take care. God bless and pray.